So we've talked about, as we were going through each of the fruits, we were talking about essentially different types of storage. And I said these were temporary, but in fact, ball jar, Tupperware, and the Ziploc, they could be semi-permanent, if you will, and permanent meaning within a time limit or within some time. And you could put them in the refrigerator. As I said, in the pantry here, the humidity will crawl in because they are not specifically airtight. This is not 100% airtight, and Ziploc bag's not airtight. So oxygen and moisture will eventually go back in there.
Fat Tom.
Which is?
Food, acid, time, temperature, oxygen, moisture.
And the last two is what we're talking about. Oxygen will oxidize and this will start to turn brown. Moisture will start to get flippy and you can feel it. It doesn't
mushy.
feel right. Mushy.
Right.
And those are conditions for?
Well, E. coli, salmonella, and botulism.
And different bacteria.
All sorts of stuff.
Okay, so you could, as I said, put all of those into refrigerator, but then I've done a few things that I like to use. We use a vacuum sealer. In this case, it's a Food Saver, and I've taken some of the bananas that we started out with, the Ziploc, and I vacuum sealed it. And this is something that I will keep in the refrigerator for a longer time, and I will obviously write what it is and when I sealed it or when I made it, and it will go in the refrigerator. You want to eat what's first in, first out, or what you've put in first.
FIFO, another one.
Right, and eat the latest, obviously, first. Then, and that was pre-cut bags. There are also cheaper options, and in this particular case, there's actually a roll. You can make it to whatever size that you want, essentially, and you would have to seal there, to seal one side, cut it, and then vacuum seal the rest of it. Thank you. Then we have the cinnamon sugared water apples.
My favorite.
Which, again, you can put this straight into the refrigerator. It may or may not stay crispy depending on how airtight your container is, but...
Oh, you've got another container, which you could theoretically put them in here. Use the vacuum sealer to suck out the air.
And it's reusable. So
but then you'd have to do that each time. Okay, I want to have a couple snacks, go in, eat some, put it back, and then it's the same problems leaving it in there or Ziploc. If you want it to last, then you have to do this again. So one of the options is to make small packages like this. This wasn't vacuum sealed, but we just wanted to do that. I like to have small packages of thing as a portion control so that I don't eat too much.
Okay, one thing that there's a few things to look for is really, if you look shopping for bags, look for thickness of the bag depending on what you're trying to seal, and then the type of machine. They fluctuate in terms of price.
Ooh, look at that. Wow.
You like that?
Yeah, I think that's cool. I mean, it looks like something that's packaged to last a long time.
Okay, so
Wow.
that's the same way that we did the banana, and I like to use these bags. I will cut it open and then take some out and then reseal it. I like to use them because they're quite flat, and while I understand the economics of using a box, it doesn't allow for portion control, portion management. Plus also I find, we tend to eat a lot more. Having said that, because I do like it flat, there are bags that actually work the same way as this box. And so it is flat, and there's a little, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a little space here that allows you to take out the air just the same way as you would for a box. And it's got a zipper. So it's a combination of Ziploc with vacuum seal. And it's very economical that way, so you don't have to waste the plastic. It's reusable, and washable. They come in different sizes. It's usually pre-cut because they need to put the seal on there and because it's a Ziploc. Then lastly was the chip. and we're not going to seal the chip in the vacuum seal. We could use the container to vacuum that, but because you saw how brittle it was, once I pour it into there, it may crumble into smaller
Well,
pieces.
not only that, the pressure.
Yeah, the pressure will crumple it up, and you'll actually just have crumbs. So the better method is actually to keep it in here because it's stable, and then throw it in the refrigerator.
So this can go into the freezer, right?
Yes.
Or is it just in the fridge?
Refrigerator is actually good enough for it. If you do throw it into the freezer, it'll extend the shelf life even more. Again, make sure you date it so you know when it went in and went out. And the refrigerator also, the sugars will also harden as well too. If you wanted to more chew, bring it down to room temperature, unopened, and then open it up, take what pieces you want, reseal it, put it back into the refrigerator, or clamp it or clip it and put it in the refrigerator, provided you're going to eat it within I don't know, within a week or so.
Another thing with the containers, which do come in a wide variety of sizes that you can vacuum seal through the top, you can keep vegetables in here much longer. So if I put cherry tomatoes in here, for example, or little carrots or almost any vegetable, and then seal them, that I've probably doubled the shelf life of them in the fridge. And fruits too,
fruits too, yes.
Yeah. So you definitely like jabote cava or something.
Right. So one of the things, they do come in different sizes. They come in large cylinders. They come quite large as well too. And what I like to do is actually my rice and my flour are all in these vacuum sealed containers. They're quite large. One, it prevents moisture from my flour, so I don't waste it, as well as in my rice. And after a while, we do have pests that like these grains as well, and so it prevents them from coming in.
That's a good idea.
The only thing when you're using this and you're vacuum sealing, you can pretty much seal anything, store it, but a couple of tips, if you will. Fresh fruit, monitor how much you're sealing and the vacuum, because it will take all the air out. So if you have a peach, for example, or if you have, let's even better, if you have a bread, which I've done before, it will squish it. It's not going to be bread anymore. It's going to be compacted.
Cardboard.
So you want to sort of moderate how much air do you want in there. Fresh fruits, you can have squished bananas, like a fresh banana, whatever, and for some reason you want to store it in the freezer or in the refrigerator for a period of time.
Ooh, in the freezer,
unpeeled,
dipped in chocolate.
So, and it's unpeeled, so
yeah.
And essentially it's going to be banana squished, as opposed to a banana whole, because it hasn't been frozen yet. We're actually going to talk a little bit more about freezing and what are the kinds of wrapping you would use for freezing, some of the tips and rules for freezing and thawing, which doesn't quite relate to dehydration. I mean, it's not dried fruits we're talking about fresh fruits and vegetables. So let's go with our equipment together?
Yep, we'll get it together.
Okay, so we talked about dehydration, and this is, when we vacuum sealed both the water apples, which somebody's going to keep, and then the apple bananas, and the chips obviously in the mason jar. I did talk about throwing them into the refrigerator, but you can, because they're sealed, you can actually keep on your pantry. The shelf life, it is shelf stable. We checked it for water activity. We checked it also for we're using a hygrometer as well as water activity meter. You could keep it on your pantry, but it all depends on, again, heat and humidity. The time is going to be a little shorter than if you were to put it in the refrigerator. The refrigerator becomes a little bit more brittle and you just let it come to room temperature. But these same types of storage methods some of them can also be used for freezing. And essentially for freezing, when you have fruits and vegetables, again, check for vegetables specifically, check the So Easy to Preserve, at least we would check So Easy to Preserve recipe book that gives you the pre-treatment for vegetables prior to freezing. And it's really more blanching, steam blanching or just dunking it into water. And we're not talking about cooking them, we're just quickly blanching them, and they'll give you instructions on how to do that. Once that's done and it's cool, then we can essentially, one of the things we use is actually plastic wrap. Very simple. Just wrap everything in plastic wrap and you can throw it into the freezer. But there's air, and if it's not wrapped properly, wrapped tightly, then what happens? Then there's air.
You get localized dehydration,
Or
AKA
freezer burns.
freezer burn.
So there are things that you could double up, meaning that you would wrap it in a plastic wrap to get as much air or surround it, get it as tight or compact as possible, and then as a double wrap, put it into a Ziploc bag. Alternatively, you could do the same thing, a plastic wrap, and then put it into a vacuum sealer bag and vacuum seal it.
Yep. And one of the things to do if you're putting things directly into a Ziploc is, what do you do with this? Let's say there's all kinds of goodies. I just happen to have some goodies here. And you got all this air in here. You dip this underwater to about here, and the pressure from the water forces all the air out, and then you zip it.
Just be careful not to get water into the Ziploc bag.
Right.
Okay. There are other things that have come out as well too. There's something, and we're not endorsing it, but just so you know it's available, there's something that Glad makes called Press and Seal. And Press and Seal pretty much does what Ken just did. It's actually wrapping in here that's got, essentially, it's almost like a Velcro. It will seal against each other, and it surrounds your, say, fruits, vegetables. You can see how sticky it is?
Oh.
So we would put one in here just so you could see it a little bit better. And you'll feel it. There's two different sides to it, and essentially it's, you press and it seals. So it is a new thing. It's quite expensive. It's not reusable. It doesn't like sealing again, and then you open it up by unsealing. And you can see how easy it tears, so you wouldn't want to reuse it. The key about really freezing is that you get packages that you get from the grocery store of anything. Do not throw it as is into the freezer. You have air, you have dirt in some cases, especially on fruits and vegetables. You want to clean it as much as possible. You also, again, need to prepare it. And those bags that the vegetable or fruit came in, they're not meant for the freezer. They're meant for the refrigerator in your veg bin. Okay, then there's other traditional materials, which is, this is like parchment paper. It's a little bit thicker, and in old school, it also can be called butcher paper. Butcher paper, in this case, I got uncoated butcher paper, but there's coated butcher paper, butcher paper that has, it's
Again,
not
coated butcher paper.
coated butcher paper that has a little wax covering on it, and the wax on the paper keeps the moisture in so that it doesn't, so it prevents freezer burns or localized dehydration. So the other part of freezing is the opposite. Thawing.
Oh, that's really more important in a sense. You know, once it's frozen, but thawing is where you can pick up a lot of the contaminants and bacteria and dangerous little critters that affect our body.
So thawing is actually quite critical. A lot of the times, unfortunately, you'll take whatever you had in your freezer, you'll leave it on your counter, you'll leave it in the sink and let it thaw. Well, that's what Ken's talking about, is that as it's thawing, because it's not temperature controlled, essentially you're allowing a lot of variables and potentially contaminants into whatever you're thawing. So two preferred methods of thawing is, one, you thaw it in the refrigerator, which is temperature control, in that your refrigerator should stay ballpark between 39 to 40 degrees, 41 degrees Fahrenheit. And placement is also important where you put the thawing, whatever you're thawing, because there's going to be water, so maybe put a dish under whatever you're going to be thawing, as well as the bottom shelf, so the water doesn't drip onto other things. The other way of thawing is?
Under running water.
Why would you do it under running water?
so that it's circulating and that it's evenly thawed.
So we
Right?
don't, yeah, and you're right.
I was worried about that.
You'll see that actually in a lot of, well, if you work at back of house in restaurants and kitchens, you see that a lot happening because it is constant. It keeps a constant temperature with running water. It doesn't have to be a full spigot. It's really just a trickle, just so that there's constantly circulating water that's in there. But most of us will thaw.
And that also keeps the temperature
Correct.
relatively stable once it's thawed.
So for us at home, it's usually better if you can thaw inside of a refrigerator. Do keep in mind, because it is at refrigerator temperature, it's going to take a little bit longer, sometimes overnight. Today we didn't do a lot of hands-on demonstration, but what we did do is actually show you a lot of different ways and materials you could use to package and store your products. The key, you could use whatever you want to. It all depends on preference. The key factors that you have to remember is really moisture, oxygen, and heat, and that's what you don't want, because those will lead to potentially unwanted bacteria growth as well as spoilage.
And if you want to sell your products to the public, you have to follow the Hawaii Department of Health regulations, and that is to complete a food safety training class. Now, that class can be through the Department of Health, it can be from hifoodhandlers.com, or it can be from ServSafe. There's no exception to it. You got to do it. In fact, you got to do it for Hawaii Master Food Preservers certification class.
It's important to check the information on the Department of Health for different value-added products, because there are different requirements. So, for example, only foods that they consider not potentially hazardous can be produced in a home. Otherwise, you could produce them in a certified kitchen. In some cases, you'll need to apply for a special event permit and other food permits.
Hawaii's Department of Health has published a 2-page flyer on guidelines for a homemade food operation and what you can and can't make in a home kitchen. What's considered potentially hazardous or non-hazardous. In fact, when you make something that's approved in a home kitchen, you have to put on the label that it's made in that home kitchen that's not routinely inspected by the Department of Health.
In addition to what Ken has said, you have to add your name and contact information. You also should list the ingredients that you use, from the most used to the least used. Also include the weight if it's appropriate, but include it in grams as well as in ounces. If you want to sell it through retail stores, internet, or by mail, you have additional requirements. You need to file what's called a hazardous analysis critical control point plan. In brief, we refer to it as a HACCP, H-A-C-C-P plan. The Hawaii Master Foods Preservers can actually help you through all of those requirements once you've completed our certification course.
And these are just some of the basic requirements for Hawaii. All of the information can be found at mfphawaii.org. Is that it?
I think so.
Ahui ho.
Until the next time. Bye.